I'm really excited about the topic that we have today because I think it really encompasses a lot of different crossroads that we're seeing within design. So, wellness in design is obviously something that we're hearing a lot about. The word wellness is being thrown around a lot. Biophilic design is being thrown around a lot, and all of the advantages of spending time outdoors and being in nature. And then we also have this other phenomenon of people wanting to age at home. So, aging in places is kind of what people seem to be calling it and how we seem to be hearing it. And what I really would like is for us to start considering, even if your client or your the person that you're designing for maybe isn't at a point where they have mobility issues, or where they have any restrictions in their movements, or limitations to what they can do. But if they want to stay in their home forever, then that likely they will get to a point where they'll have limitations in what they can do, and there might be restrictions. So I would like us to just start the conversation about what changes we can make now, so that when future changes do happen, it'll just be a lot easier for them to transition, and they will be able to stay in their forever homes, ideally forever. So I do have an expert here with me who I'm really excited about. So Susan is my guest today. Really quickly, just for me, my name is Ashley Smith. I'm the Director of Architect and Designer Partnerships for Urban Bonfire in Kalamazoo. I have 10 years experience in outdoor kitchen design specifically, but Susan is really the expert in the topic that we're talking about today. So I'll let her introduce herself and then we'll dive into it. So go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, so I've been an occupational therapist now for 46 years, and I built my first accessible home in Australia in 1983. And recently went back and looked at it. It's still there and still doing that. And I've rebuilt another one here recently. And when we're talking about accessibility and aging in place, of course, obviously, I am now in that audience that we're talking about. But I have to tell you, even when I'm really mobile, those universal design things that we are going to discuss and some of those features are so helpful. Just bringing groceries inside, moving furniture into the house. So when we put that in the outdoor space, thinking about those universal design principles as a basic starting place that are going to make this environment accessible to a wide range of people across generations, across families. Bringing a child in a stroller out into the backyard, using a young child who's just learning to walk, or a young adult who has difficulty walking or is in a wheelchair. So there's a range of people that we're going to be able to cater for to make that space more useful. And so those are the things we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So, Susan, you kind of alluded to this already, but we're going to kind of group everything into five basic points. We did write an article about this as well. Susan was kind enough to contribute to an article. So we have a written version of this. And again, we will share out the recording after. But basically, the 5 points that we're going to be looking at is entrances and exits. These are very important. Steps and pathways, making it comfortable, gardens that give back, and then of course we have to bring it back to outdoor kitchen design. So kitchen design considerations specifically for when you're designing for an aging population or a limited mobility population. So with entrances and exits, we talked about this already, and some of this imagery is really beautiful, but there are some limitations to what we're seeing here as well. So and I think this is the balance that we're trying to find, because we do appreciate beauty and we want to have beautiful spaces, and everybody who is designing these spaces with Urban Bonfire and Kalamazoo products, they are beautiful, and we don't want to take away from that. There are just some things that we can add so that this is a little bit more long-term design, I'll say. So Susan, I'll let you jump in there.
Well, definitely. I mean, just because things are accessible or universal design doesn't mean we have to take away all the design features and the beauty of it. It no longer needs to look like a hospital or a hospital garden or an industrial garden or, any of those things. So there are so many things there, but we do need to have some considerations. And so definitely like doorway widths. And this one is beautiful because it's a very big doorway width, but we want something that is going to at least be 36 inches and preferably 40 or 42. And if it's going to be a place where people are going to be coming and going together, you want to make it at least probably 48. So thinking about this kind of doorway is ideal. Then thinking about the thresholds. So, when we think about regular sliding doors, we have an inch or more of a threshold that someone with a walker or a wheelchair or trip hazard is going to have to get over. So, thinking about threshold ramps that may do that, or lowering things into the design as we access and get out into those spaces. The other things with it is transition spaces. And,
Mhm.
as we're holding objects or moving things, so if we're going outside to eat or to do something and those things. So our hands are full, or we have to place things. So thinking about, is there a table nearby the doorway so that we can put things down while we open the doorway? Is there a landing space there that can help us with maneuvering that? And those can all
Mhm.
be designed into it in a way that not only adds to the function to think about that, but adds to the beauty of what's going on. And then
Yeah.
making sure that if we are looking at a platform outside, that it's, going to be something that if someone was using a wheelchair, they could turn around on. So preferably at least 5 by 5. And here we're going to talk, and I think I want to just say that as we have this conversation, we're going to talk about preparing for aging in place without specific needs, without a specific need right now. So it's a forever home and it's universally designed. But if you have a client that is asking you about something and they're facing specific issues, this may be something where adding an OT for a short period of time to your design team may be helpful to look at making sure that space fits their unique needs. We're going to talk in general terms right now, but that's something to think about adding. And then the other thing is that contrast. And we can really see that glare in this picture, right?
Mhm.
And as we age, our eyes react differently to that light and what we do there. So that glare is going to really be a difficult issue for them. So thinking about how can we break down glare? What can we do on our flooring surfaces, even on the outside patios flooring surfaces, that we don't have glare? And then how do we do that in terms of like provision of shade and awnings and those kinds of things?
That was something that certainly stuck out to me the first time that we spoke, was having the considering the transition space. So having an awning or a patio or something to allow your eyes to adjust between the indoor and outdoor. Because I'm a little bit younger, and so this is not something that I have ever really thought about. I've never had to wear glasses. I've been very blessed with really good vision and not really having any issues in that way. But that was something that seems so obvious now that I know it, but wouldn't have been something that I considered in the past, and just allowing for that point of transition so that when you're walking from the inside to the outside, you can see. It's kind of important. Um, Something else that I just wanted to mention that you had kind of touched on as well, and no matter what design dialogues topic I talk about, I always end up saying this: the best design is the design that is most suited to your specific client. And so, depending on what your client's needs are now and in the future, there's not one answer that fits everything. And that's, I think, what I love about everything that I'm reading about design right now is that it is so much more unique to each individual person. It's not big trends that are just being applied to everybody. People are showing their character within design. And I think that's something that's really important. And you want to feel that in your space, but it's also just the truest sign of good design to me personally.
I think the positives of that too are you're going to have a much more satisfied client for a longer period of time, right? And you think about that if you were just to give the standard response, the standard design features, I always say in our business, it's like hospital socks, right? One size fits everybody, really fits nobody.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happens. And so for the best design, customizing it, and you already know about customizing in terms of design features. Now we just want to customize in terms of overall accessibility and universal design features, right?
Right. And I love
The
how a
other
lot
thing
of
I
the oh, I was just going to say that a lot of the features that we're seeing right now are these big open doorways. So I think design is evolving a little bit to be thinking of this, and these trends that we're seeing are naturally kind of gravitating towards that aging in place and having these kind of bigger, easier open spaces to be able to walk in and out of. And I love to see that.
Absolutely. The other thing I was going to say, as we do this, making the transition from surfaces, as we talked about aging vision, we want to make sure that there's enough contrast to be aware that there is a transition and a change, right? Because if
Hmm.
you have vision problems and that's a big open space, thinking about being able to navigate that and being aware that the surface changes. So that's the other piece to think about there when we're designing the surface outside that door.
And I think we can get into that because that kind of segues into our next point here, which is more about steps and pathways and where you're seeing maybe a change in either the type of flooring or what you're stepping on or in elevation. And so I kind of divided up into two here. We're talking about steps at the beginning. And everybody, I think, knows the basic considerations of steps, right? You want to have them lit up so that you can see. You don't want too much of a shadow. You don't want a pattern that is going to be confusing, that can be a tripping hazard. And you need a railing essentially. But are there any other kind of little tips that you can add to that we can consider?
I would suggest that where possible, when you only have a small height difference, right, overall rise on those steps, I would alternate, have alternative options such as a ramp.
Mhm.
And for that reason is that if you're using a cart to push items out for the kitchen, right, you can put items on a cart versus multiple carry loads, right? And having to worry about your balance on the steps. If you have family coming over where you have a child in a stroller pram, that is again going to be helpful. So where possible, thinking about instead of a couple of steps, is there a nice way to put a ramp into that? Definitely one of the issues with, these concrete steps that we're seeing here is that this barrier, this boundary where there's a drop off, isn't clearly marked in terms of contrast. So thinking about where those are, contrast on those, thinking about contrast on the steps. If your vision is having what we call problems with contrast sensitivity, where the steps are all the same color in concrete here, which are nice and they're going to last, particularly in our Pacific Northwest weather, right? And they'll
Mhm.
become green eventually, and you'll have to anyway, pressure wash them. But thinking about, can I put a strip or a color barrier where the edge of the step is? So that contrast piece, and you put that there, contrast strips on the edge, but just being aware that that helps with the older eyes. And then in this design that we have here, there are ways to incorporate small railings into those smaller steps as well, right? So that
Mhm.
people can steady themselves as they're going up and down those.
And I imagine the strips at the end of the steps, these are something that can be easily retrofitted as well.
Yes.
So even if the design at the beginning, if this is not something that the client wants, and then later on maybe it's a little bit more necessary, it can be something that can be added. I recently did it for my dog because she's getting old and she's having a hard time going up and down the stairs. So I've added a little carpet to each step. And that's just made like such a big change to her mobility. Not to compare people to dogs. This is just my experience. And I think it's important to
Yes.
think about maybe right now, this isn't something that you want to incorporate, but later on, it will be something that can be retrofitted that will increase that experience for that individual.
Definitely. And there are multiple ways to do that, and particularly in outdoor settings that add a non slip on that edge piece there, as well as the contrast. So, those are all important things to think about.
Yeah. And then in terms of pathways, obviously here we have ideally 36 to 48 inches wide, which you had kind of mentioned about doorways too. Depends if people are passing one another, if it's one at a time. And then pathways having a slight pitch to help direct water, I thought was also really smart, especially if you're in an area like you and I, we're in the north, a little bit more north. We get ice, we get snow, we get this accumulation of liquid, and we get very cold temperatures. And it has been a skating rink in Montreal for the last 2 weeks because nothing seems to be pitched properly, and we've been having these crazy weather patterns. So thinking about that, I think is also a huge
Yeah,
consideration. And I do think a lot of landscape architects are considering this as well, but it's such a meaningful difference for anybody who has any fear of slipping or falling.
Absolutely. And thinking about ways that the steps are going to drain, right? Not just in terms of slope, but the actual surface that you're using is definitely a key piece. But then you have to match those with trip, fall, or rolling kind of things. And we talk about that when we're building regular ramps. You have a slope that goes across the ramp to help it drain, but then you also have the slope coming down the ramp for the person to walk up. And so, when we're talking about walkways, we really want a slope that's about 1 in 20 or a 5% grade. And that's considered a natural normal slope that anyone can manage fine, whether they're walking, pushing, in a chair. When we start talking about smaller ramps and other options, we start thinking about who is the person and what are we doing. So 1 in 12 is considered by ADA the recommendation for ramps. But as we all know, ADA doesn't apply to the home, and we need to customize that for our clients. But when we're talking about universal design and aging in place, this is a really good place to start, right? As we think about
Mhm.
that. And that's where I said before, we've got a slope here. If we look at code, that drop is considered somewhere around 6.5 to 7 inches all across the US for those steps, for each rise, for each step. So now here you have about a 21-inch rise. If you look at that for 1 in 12, you're going to look at a 21-foot ramp. Is there a way to be able to build something that into your design, and where it's, where you're able to put landscaping parts around it or plants or however a feature that's going to make this um, seem integrated into that part of the design.
Yeah. And if you're somebody like me, I live in an urban center and I have a beautiful backyard, but 21 feet would be the entirety of it.
Exactly. And there are options where we can put platform lifts and stuff in later if the clients need it, but having even just a handrail here. The other thing with paths is the surface. We used to put like a mix of gravel or other things, and thinking about how hard that is to maintain your balance on, particularly if it's much more larger stones or any of those things. So, looking at what is going to be a stable, smooth surface. And it's really nice to see some of those nice pavers, but when you start to get big gaps between them, then it's too hard to push a wheelchair over or a walker over. So you shouldn't have any more than about a quarter to 3/4 of an inch gap between any of those pavers so that the wheels go over it easily. So thinking about ways to look at that. And we have there the fine gravel, which is really good, but those nice looking bigger, size river stones become a problem.
Well, especially because they tend to be an uneven surface as well, right? So then it's the dual, it's the gap as well as the texture of it.
Absolutely. And things will catch on them, whether it's your foot or the walker or the wheelchair. And it just adds to the extra work and the feeling of insecurity to go out there. And we talked earlier about why these outdoor spaces are so important, right? Our mental health, our physical health, our social health, being able to engage and be part of that. And as everyone ages, we're going to age better if we can engage in all of those components. And so thinking about that. And then again, you talked about visibility. So thinking about motion sensing lighting, and,
Hmm.
putting that lighting every 10 to 15 feet so that it's going to keep a good center of light on that pathway. High contrast between the borders and the edges for sure, so that people know if their vision or if there's shadows there at certain times of the day, or we're in nighttime now, that people can see clearly where those edges end, and we're not going to be tripping as we go towards that edge and border. And then as the surface transitions, again, the same thing, right? If we transition from a concrete surface to a gravel surface or to some other components, we want to make sure that it's clear that we're undertaking a transition. And
Hmm.
it's
If
easy
you know
on
what's
some of
coming.
those it's easy on some of those pathways to incorporate railings on one side into the landscaping, right? Or into the design feature.
Hmm. And I think we do get into that a little bit here when we're saying make it comfortable. It's, you know, some of these projects and some of the projects that our individuals who are listening in are working on are fairly large. And so to walk around the entire property, might take a little while. And so one of the things that we had talked about was having those like well-placed seating areas or having those railings along the way so somebody can take a break while they're walking through. It doesn't need there's not wide gaps of areas where there's no place to stop or take a rest. And I thought that that was really nice. And I think it changes the way that you think about the space as well. And you're creating different zones, which is something that
Yes.
we talk about in kitchens a lot. But having these different kind of seating areas and resting areas, I think it just makes it feel very intentional and brings you to maybe a corner of the yard that you wouldn't have gone to before. But now there's a specific area there that has a beautiful bench or it has a place where you can stop and, I don't know, smell the flowers as an example.
Or read or sit in the sun at different times of the day or just have a private conversation. So, absolutely, we shouldn't have any more than 200 feet between where rest areas are available. But for some clients, that may even be too far. So, thinking within your yard, can we have little nooks or just little things? Or when you're building those landscaping features in, can one of them be a little rest bench or, you know, and again, we're going to talk about, well, we need to have those at higher places. I even notice now getting out of a couple of the sofas in our house, they're so much lower and we have a higher one. So thinking our kitchen chairs, we're looking at around 17 inches for the height of the seating surface there. Thinking about varying heights of the seating surface, but having some that are higher and definitely with armrests at least on one side. Cushions are always good, but then we have to think about maintenance, right?
Mhm.
So thinking about balancing that out, but definitely that's going to be really important to make it most functional overall. And definitely not metal seats. I don't know who remembers the old metal bus seats in the sun on a hot day, right?
For me, it
So
was
thinking about,
the slide at the
oh
elementary
yes,
school that was metal that we would burn ourselves on. But everybody has that
absolutely.
childhood experience.
Yes. Um, we've covered a lot right now, and I'm not seeing any questions from our audience. And I just thought before we go on, this might be a nice time to see if there are any comments about things that we've talked about to incorporate.
Yeah, I would love to. There's not as many people as there was before, so I understand if maybe the people are less willing or less likely to type in. The chat was so alive before with everybody trying to help me, and I appreciate that very much. Um, I will say, in terms of materials and things, and I'm putting you on the spot, so if you don't have an answer to this and we want to follow up on it, that can be something that we look into. But, when we're talking about materials for outdoors, it does get difficult to source anything that isn't metal or that isn't concrete, that isn't iron, that isn't quite robust. And so, do you have any experience with different furnitures that you would use outside that, don't get too hot, but also aren't really heavy and um, kind of fit the bill for some of the things that we're talking about?
Some of our outdoor furniture and garden furniture uses an aluminum or aluminium kind of frame, which is relatively
Hmm.
light to move. We just have to think about, is it stable in that position? Um,
Yeah.
in our environment, concrete works well. But again, we have to think about how that surface is going to drain throughout the seasons because nobody's moving a concrete bench, right? Um, and so thinking about also, is this somewhere where cushions can be taken and then removed? And so those are
Hmm.
going to be there, but who's going to do that? Wood, when we look at some pressure treated wooden options, combined with a metal frame. So the seating is more the wood and the frame is more metal or concrete. Those things tend to hold up in our area pretty well and are still comfortable with that. But looking at the height of the seating and varying that is going to be important.
Yeah. And I would say we had talked about this too, and I can't remember if I had said this in in the times that we have talked today, because we've had a couple, but the barrier to entry is so important. And if there's anything standing in the way of enjoying the space, then it will make the client less likely to do it. It will make the individual less likely to do it. So you do want to eliminate that as much as possible. And so, of course, I'm always thinking about cabinetry. And if you do have these seating areas that maybe are a little bit more remote, maybe if you incorporate somewhere where you can store those cushions next to the seating area, that might make it more likely for it to be used, and it allows it to be comfortable and have that cushion without having to worry about the maintenance of it, because you can put it away super quick. You can take it out super quick. I don't know. Just a little
I really like
consideration.
I really like that idea. Absolutely. And you can come and design my backyard with those for me. Um,
Perfect.
so yeah, those are really good ideas. And the same if you're going to be using any of the other items when we get to the kitchen area or out here in terms of lighting, a fire pit or any of those things. Small storage areas nearby that are accessible that keep some of those items that you need there are definitely going to make it more usable and less barriers to use. And that's a really good point. If it takes me all day to get ready to get things out there and to get them there, I'm exhausted by that time if I'm older or I have some kind of chronic condition that's going to impact that. So I'm not likely going to be, utilizing that space then under those conditions. So
Yeah, which we want to encourage. You've built these beautiful spaces for the clients, and you've, put so much consideration and thought into it, that just going that one level extra, that will make sure that they actually do, are able to take advantage of all of the benefits of being in outdoors and enjoying their outdoor spaces. It's what do we say, 95 or 80-20%. It's like you can have 80% of it done, but it's the last 20% that really matters. I can't remember exactly what the expression is, but it's something along those lines. And I think that this falls into that, as well. Like
and
you said, if,
and and yeah, and that 20% can create a barrier, right? It can make it
yeah,
inaccessible. And so
yeah,
thinking about, and this is where us as occupational therapists come into play, because it's not just the environment, but it's what you're going to do in that space, right? And have that space ready to enhance that specific component of performing this task, right? So if it's a barrier
yeah.
to have to gather all the things you need together, it's going to be a barrier with that. Um, so when we talk about how do outdoor environments affect people's mental, physical, social health, there's multiple studies that look at the effect of green spaces overall on decreased depression, decreased mental stress, of reducing the inflammatory C-reactive proteins that are coming from stress. There's also the fact that we're now incorporating larger distances to walk, to get up and down, engage in occupation. And for people as they're aging, continue to encourage that movement, engagement in gardening. If we look at like things like the blue zones, where we've studied, National Geographic did an article on it, where we studied people who were over 100 in different populations. The biggest factors that came out were they were outside, they were doing things, they frequently had gardens, they were moving a lot in those spaces. Often it was because they were growing food, but even if you're enjoying that space and looking at that, still going to do that. And then the other component was the social component. And so where you can have people gather and do things and enjoy, we know that social isolation by itself as you age is a predetermining factor to not aging well. And that can be in terms of dementia. And then we know that people who have cognitive impairments as they age, such as dementia and stuff, that green spaces in nursing homes and skilled nursing and aged care facilities have demonstrated decreased use of medications and increased positive interactions versus aggressive interactions. So there's so many studies coming out about the importance of outdoor spaces in our health.
Yeah, I think we're
Leo, does
seeing
that answer your
so
question?
I think you answered it very well. And I love that we're seeing more and more studies on this exact topic as well. It's part of wellness, I think, at the end of the day. And people are really focused on that right now, which is, I think, the best shift that we have had in a long time. It's one of the trends that I don't like to call a trend because I very, very much hope that it is here to stay. And wellness means different things to different people. It's not always cold plunges and spas. Sometimes it's a fragrance garden or, having a spot in the sunshine or creating, my favorite saying is creating a ritual out of a routine. So taking something that's mundane and making it something special. And there's just these little tweaks that you can make so easily within your everyday activities that can make the day feel a little bit more special. And to me, that's wellness, and outside is a huge part of that for me as well.
And I think that's true because people are now saying, well, I don't want to live longer if those last 10 years are really poor quality of life. And so that is now the concept of wellness versus medication based health, right? And so thinking about the studies showing that engagement in outdoor spaces really helps us with all of those components overall of wellness. And even thinking about, are there outdoor exercise pieces that we can incorporate into some of this yard space that encourages activity as we age? And that's why even some of the rails out here, people could do squats if there's a handrail up against a flat surface. Thinking about different ways we can engage physical activity and components with whatever the person is doing with that space. Oh, our outdoor gardening.
Yeah, I thought this
I
was a
love
good
this.
segue into outdoor gardening.
I love this except for the pathway. Um,
Yes.
but thinking about those raised height beds, we are building some of those into our garden design as we're doing that, varying the heights, looking at providing even small spaces and opportunities that people can garden in without a lot of excessive work or it being extremely demanding. That last one was great because that's the kind of gardening I do, but not everyone has the time or motivation. But small pot, small things on the edge of a patio. But thinking about how difficult it is to bend over, to lift, to raise that. So thinking about heights, 24 to 36 inches, again, depending on the person, 24 inches of deep soil again is going to be helpful. Thinking about again having space of about at least 3 feet or 36 inches or meter between those beds, so people can bring walkers, wheelbarrows, wheelchair if needed, into there. And again, what we said about pathways applies in here as well. Thinking about a variety of, you put there fragrance gardens. There's nothing nicer to me going out into my garden and the rosemary is all there and I brush against it and the oregano's there and those kinds of things are really important. But I'm also going to say selecting plants that are not toxic
Mm,
because we may have, as we age, one partner or one person who has a cognitive impairment. And if you're pulling plants from the garden to eat, may not be aware of don't pick this one. So, removing those toxic kind of plants and putting safe varieties in there is going to be important. And just a variety of options, I think. And then seating in the garden area is really important, because you're coming out there to work and then there's nowhere to sit to take a
yes.
break. And that's even the situation in my garden now. And I'm looking at how can I put a seating option out there and what does that look like? So there's just so many options for you to do that. The other thing is water features. They have such a calming, overall de-stressing component, but thinking about maintenance as well. So it's
Mm.
the combination of how do we create something that's lower maintenance, but it still produces that calming, relaxing, peaceful nature sound that water gives us?
I
And
did read
can
a
we
study
create?
that said, oh, sorry, I was just putting in a little tidbit. Did read
No,
a
no, no,
study
go
or
ahead.
a couple. that mentioned that listening to the sound of water actually does decrease your stress levels as well. So if you're feeling really stressed, you can go outside, go to your water feature, and you can hopefully immediately feel some of the, even physical benefits of having something like that in your space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or the other thing is if you're designing an outdoor area and like the bedroom is nearby, putting it where it can be heard in the bedroom as well as,
Mm,
outside. So those
yes.
kinds of features. And so thinking about those components of design with that, where the benefits are, and if that can be closer or between there so that it can be heard from the bedroom as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's bringing the outdoors inside, which is the whole principle of biophilic design for interior design. It's trying to immerse yourself within the nature so that you can get advantage all the benefits of it. So I would love to be able to hear water. I hear trains, but it's a different environment.
We're about to finish off the water feature here in our new house, but in our last house, we did have that. And it was so helpful in terms of going to sleep and relaxing when people are stressed. So that's definitely a key. If the opportunity is there, thinking about placement of a water feature and then placement of a seating feature around it so that, you can sit and listen and relax with that
Mhm.
piece. And how can you integrate seating into those things? And we've talked about things like building it into retaining walls, blending the ramps in with terrace solutions. So there are whole lots of ways around that to think about how you can put little seating spots in there. Again, I would tend to think that the lowest you would want them to go. And I know some of outdoor furniture can be sort of in the relaxing mode. And we're talking about 14, 15 inches high for the seating surface, which is way too low for most people who are aging to get out of. So thinking about, 17 to 19 inches, varying it, making sure there's something nearby for them to push off.
Yeah, this is making me think of like traditional English gardens, like rose gardens that have wrought iron furniture and things like that kind of placed throughout. I don't know, it's feeling very whimsical and I love it. I'm a fan of
Yeah,
the
so there's
whimsical, so
old Yeah, all those old concrete curved benches with the, all of those components in them that have the arms on them. So there's many ways to incorporate that design into it with the pathways and stuff.
mhm.
With that, and just looking at this pathway in this photo while we're looking at it, the one around the water feature and going off to the back there, that's one that's probably accessible. This nice feature here with the concrete slabs in between, that looks lovely, but it's not accessible, right? Wheelchairs,
Mhm.
walkers, seniors, we're all going to trip on that or get caught on it. So thinking about how to build that. If you wanted to use those features, they'd want to be very close together or just continue the pathway that way or do a solid concrete or, some of those rubber texturized pathways that are available.
I think after this talk, I'm going to notice so many more things in the designs and photography that we receive. I'll be so much more aware of these items now.
Yes.
And of course, to bring everything full circle, I do quickly want to talk about outdoor kitchen design as well and considerations that we can kind of start thinking about right away. Before we get into this too much, I do just want to point out it's not really anywhere on our website, but Urban Bonfire does offer ADA accessible cabinetry. So we do have roll under areas of workspaces as well as roll under sink cabinets. This is something that we have thought about. And like we said, ADA is not always the be all end all. It's not necessarily what's required for your particular client. But I did just want to mention that because I think it's something that's not commonly known. And then if people have any questions specifically about kitchens as we go through this, please put them in the chat as well, or anything else that you've heard because we are coming up on time. So feel free to initiate that
Yeah.
conversation.
Or Ashley, I loved your comments about what you were thinking and how you're going to look at things differently now. I'd like to hear comments from the audience if there's anything that we've had in our conversation that's going to help them think differently. as you know, I was really pleased to hear about the products that you have that do have some features that are going to make it more accessible for a larger group of people. And like I've said, even though ADA does not apply to the home and doesn't meet everybody's needs, it's a good starting point for general accessibility. And it's a good starting point to start thinking about universal design. And universal design is, opening this space up to a wide variety of users who have different
Hmm.
needs, different clients. So thinking about, again, obviously the pull-out drawers that you have here are great. Thinking about storage, thinking about also you're going to be bringing items back and forwards from the house to here. What's a really good way to, one, minimize that, and two, do that? So again, I'm going to come back to recommending a cart that would park beside here. And then with that cart, thinking about a rampway to be able to take it back into the house area. So again, the ramp is suitable for lots of things. And I have to tell you, I do not have steps from my garage into my house. It is ramped. It is that, and the same from the front. Coming in from the grocery store, with loads of grocery things, absolutely. Looking at
Hmm.
handles that are accessible. I love these handles because you can hook underneath them and pull them out. If you have hand issues, you can put a loop on those and pull them, right? There are a variety of options there. One of the things we discussed is we cannot get rid of this cabinet underneath the barbecue cooking area because of all what's there. I'm going to challenge you all to see if you can reduce something at the bottom here a little bit, so that wheelchair feet can go underneath it. But all the controls are at the front, which is really perfect. The person is not reaching across hot surfaces to do that. We were talking on Monday about options to open this lid, right? That is
Hmm.
ergonomically sound. But there are ways that as therapists we can come up with that if it's a problem for somebody. Um, Lever handles, absolutely, in the sinks and the faucets when we look at those in the stuff. And definitely varying counter heights, I would say, you are not likely going to put an adjustable counter out in a garden area just because, unless you have a waterproof area. Um, but where someone can sit to work at that counter space, or another area that is stand to work. Though I think having those
Hmm.
variable options and some seating allows for more variety of users and allows for people who may fatigue easily to be able to
Sure.
continue in the task and rest. So those are all going to be different options. And then just the space, you know, making sure that someone can maneuver in that space if they have a walker or a wheelchair, in looking at just having that, 5 by 5 or even bigger space there that they can turn in, and then work zones. And one of the things that we will talk about a little later again is that lighting needs to change here, right? As we age and we're coming out into potentially using this at night or in where the lighting varies, we're going to need task focused lighting for these
Hmm.
components. So thinking about, here's where lighting options are very different than what we were talking about in the pathways or the seating options. We're now talking about task focused lighting.
Yeah, certainly. I will say this, everything that you're saying as well, I think helps a lot of our clients or anybody who's working in communal spaces because it allows you for that universal design because you don't know who's going to be used. These communal spaces within a condo development, as an example, or we've done spaces at, a university or public spaces that are open to a variety of different people. So having these considerations of having maybe an area that's 34 inches versus 36 or 37 inches and considering that just makes it more usable for any potential user, as well as obviously the individual residences when you're considering that and what future needs might be for that. So having the variety of counter heights, I think, could be super beneficial in especially these like universal areas where anybody can be using it. Lighting is something really important too that I've talked about a lot. I did a whole panel on lighting as well. And I mean, kitchens are one of these unique places that you need three different types of light. You need safety lighting, ambient lighting, and task lighting. And that is obviously important to anybody, but can be more important to those as they're aging and maybe, or anybody whose sight is deteriorating as well. So consider that. Make sure that you are including lighting in within the outdoor kitchen space so that anybody who's working out here with anything sharp, as an example, isn't going to be hurting themselves, or they can actually see what they're doing. Very,
Or
very
things like,
important.
yeah, things like knocking glasses over and stuff like that as well, because these are harder
Yeah.
surfaces generally outside. And so we're going to create a safety issue. The other thing is thinking about where you can incorporate remote controls into some of those lighting things, because the lights are up high depending where the switches are. And instead of, if we're going to do that, can we use rocker switches? Can we use other switches that are going to, or remotes that are going to allow more accessible options? Right, when
Mm-hmm.
we look at that component and where those in are, because again, are we going to have plug-in outlets that are at the back of this counter? Right, that's going to make it really hard from anyone who's seated to be able to reach that. And so thinking about, are they going to be on the end of the counter, are they going to be in a more accessible place so that a variety of people can access them.
And that's a really good point that I want to add on to as well. Outdoor counters tend to be about 30 inches deep versus 24. So if you do have a plug in the backsplash, it is harder for somebody seated to reach. So we do have a cabinet that has Urban Bonfire and Kalamazoo, both lines have cabinets that have plugs integrated into the front of the cabinet so that it's really easy to access. Just a little difference between the indoor and the outdoor that some people forget about and don't consider in the electrical
Yeah.
design.
And even in the indoor, it's still hard for someone seated to reach because of often the height that it's up as well. So you're not
Mm,
reaching over, but you're also reaching higher. And then you often have equipment placed in front of that you're trying to work with. So I
true.
love that you have those in the front of the cabinet, and that is really helpful. Um, I think again, varying the furniture height in that area, but also leaving space for someone who may have greater mobility needs or be using a wheelchair. So again, this is leaving space open to access it so a variety of people can do that. And then we talked about sitting and standing options um,
Mhm.
with that for sure. Uh, Time outdoors, yes. I mean, I here in the Pacific Northwest, where most of the time our winter is 6 months of wet and overcast, that impacts our overall ability to exercise, socialize, be outside. And we know that creating those spaces where we can do that and thinking about where could we possibly enjoy, even if it's a place where we do get a lot of rain, creating covered
Mhm.
spaces, created easily accessible spaces where those air environments are not going to get slippery. And that's the other thing we didn't talk about on decks, looking at the slip factor on the deck covered surface and making sure that it, even when it's wet, it has a slip coefficient that is not going to allow slippage. So that's one of the other things when we're looking at those surfaces. And I've seen that a lot where people look at putting in some of those cheaper artificial, decking surfaces, and they fill up with the water or the ice, or they collect the snow. There's no drainage pieces in them, and they become very slippery.
Mhm. We don't want that. That's the we say that in outdoor kitchens as well is like the area around the outdoor kitchen, basically treat it like the area around a pool. It's going to get messy, it's going to get wet, there's going to be oil, so you want to make sure that you have some slip resistance built into the flooring. And obviously that applies to universal design as well. You don't want there to be a slipping or tripping hazard, especially if that's the majority of the surface. It's you need to be conscious of those decisions.
Absolutely. And if you need to use a surface that you're not as well versed in how slip resistant it is, there are new components coming out now that are using the ADA code for slipping. And there's also, like Slip Doctor has some products that will work well on the outside surfaces to increase the slip resistance. So just thinking about ways when clients are suggesting they want a particular material to check that on the surfaces for sure.
Hmm. I imagine there are different finishes probably or aftermarket, I don't know, like coatings or things that you might be able to add as
Yes.
well if you are in a situation where, maybe you realize it's a little bit more slippy than you would like, and instead of having to replace it, I imagine, I'm not an expert on this, but
No.
it would be good to look into that.
Slip Doctor sells products like that. So there are products out there. There are several
Perfect.
different products, absolutely. And those are things to think about. And I think the other piece again is just thinking and listening to your clients and understanding how they imagine themselves using the area, and then
Mhm.
thinking about as we age how that aging process is going to impact how they're using
Yeah.
that. And if they already, as we said before, have some issues or know they're going to face some issues, potentially bringing an OT in with you for a short consultation to look at some design features that may incorporate adaptation to their specific needs, but involving the end user. We always say, in our situation, client focused care. But that is just so important here for that overall one, you want them to use it. Two, you want happy clients that are going to talk about how this outdoor space has been amazing for them.
Yeah, I mean, this is really where we're adding value at the end of the day. This is where designers, like anybody you're paying to consult on your space, this is for the end consumer, that's the value that you're looking to get out of it. That they're thinking of things that you're not thinking of, and that they're thinking ahead into the future, and it's not just something that is suitable for right now, but ideally suitable for every variation of what you go through as an individual in your own home. So I think it's super important, and I'm really thankful that you were able to talk to us today. I hope that people do get to listen to the recording as well. Anybody who couldn't make it back because of my technical difficulties, I'm so sorry about that. But yeah, I think this is just such an important topic, and I hope that everybody learned something. If anybody does have any questions, now is the time. I will stop the recording soon because we're already way over time, but please enter any comments or questions or anything in the chat. And then Susan, I'll just give you the opportunity to do a little summary while we're seeing if anybody has anything come in.
Yeah, and I think maybe even if they wanted to put in the chat one thing they learned out of today's thing that's going to make them think a little bit more about it. I think when we look at overall, and you talked about the concept of wellness and aging in place, that whole concept looks at that silver tsunami that's happening now that I'm part of, looking at how we want to spend the rest of our lives and the quality and the value. And outdoor spaces have become meaningful. And
Mhm.
so being able to continue to access those is not only important for us to continue the hobbies and the interests and the stuff that we have, but is important for our ongoing physical and mental health. So being able to design those in a way that we can still continue to use as we age, or that suits a variety of our family members who are coming to spend the time in those spaces with us, is going to be important.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially we're seeing more and more like ADUs, additional dwelling units, and things like that being added on to homes so that either maybe aging parents can come live with their children, or somebody who is aging will be able to have a live-in um, aid, I'll say,
Caregiver.
somebody
Yeah.
who's there to help them. Yeah. And so considering like who that is going to be within that additional dwelling unit will be an important factor as well in deciding what making these important decisions within the design. maybe the pathway between the two, making sure that that's accessible, that doesn't have any gaps and things like that. Leo, I'll definitely send out Susan's information afterwards within the email. It's funny, the story of how I met Susan, I'm just going to share it here because I think it's great. I was on another webinar that Susan was not a part of. She was a guest, just like I was an attendee, just kind of listening in. And the comments that she had written were just so smart and something that I could just relate to so much. And it really just made the information so digestible. And so I found her on LinkedIn. I asked her to contribute to an article and then to this conversation with me. And I'm so happy I did. And I do learn a lot from other, conversations that I'm part of and conferences that I go to. But the amount that I have learned from Susan just within the chat of another conference was pretty incredible. So very happy to have met her. Very happy to have her on today. She does have a lot of knowledge, and I'll definitely share out how you can communicate with her after this.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I appreciate you including me in those conversations because I think when we look at designing spaces that are going to work, as the population has different needs, it's going to take a bigger team than we originally thought of or had to best meet those needs. And so, how do we as a team collaborate in a way that helps that?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's such an important word that you just said is collaboration. And I think so many different design professionals are collaborating now because of the intentional design that they want specifically for their clients. So bringing in the experts like the OTs, and I think that we'll see more of that. I hope that we'll see more of that so that it is really specific design, intentional design.
Yes, I'm looking forward to
Okay.
that.
Yeah. I didn't see any other questions come in. I will leave one other quick minute just in case anybody's shy or they're taking their time writing their question. Oh, there we go. We did get one. So for those that live in an HOA, it just moved, sorry, which may be hesitant on change, is there a written summary that advocates for the importance of this design concept? That's a good question.
So interesting. In the United States, there have been some issues related to homeowners associations when we've made recommendations for accessibility, and some people have started to take the homeowners association to court, which we don't really like to do. But this is their home, and they're needing to live here. And there has been some discussion about using the Fair Housing Act because it's more than 4 units that are under this corporate body, not owned by one, but under that. Um, there are some issues, but I have seen some successful changes related to that. Also, there may be ways that we can make changes and still stay within some of the recommendations, or thinking about how to advocate for small variations that are going to allow for more universal accessibility, versus just the one way of viewing things that often homeowners associations have. So it's really case by case with the homeowners association, um, with how they're wanting to view that.
Yeah, it's like you said, so often it's not one size fits all, and I hope that is getting represented as well. And maybe we can see some change happening there.